All right, so welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring this blog post, Mental Wellness, Nurturing the Mind for a Healthier Life. And I think this one's going to be pretty relatable. It's not just, the feel-good, fluffy stuff. We're going to really get into how mental wellness really impacts, all parts of our lives.
Yeah, I think what's really fascinating is how this blog post talks about these 7 different key aspects of mental wellness and really emphasizes that it's not just about, happiness.
Yeah, and it's interesting how everything's so interconnected. Like it's this big web, right? I mean, out of those seven, I have to admit the ones that kind of, grabbed my attention the most were occupational and spiritual well-being.
Oh, interesting. A lot of people tend to jump straight to like emotional or physical. What made you gravitate towards those two?
Well, for occupational well-being, I think the blog post really made me realize how often we kind of just settle for jobs that are, just okay instead of pursuing work that really lights us up. Like, what if we could all have that sense of purpose, fulfillment every day?
Yeah, that's a really powerful thought to think about. Challenges the whole idea of work-life balance. How about spiritual well-being? What about that one?
Okay, I'll admit it. I used to think, spiritual meant like chanting on a mountaintop or something. But this blog post, I think, reframed it really beautifully. It's about finding that meaning, that purpose, and whether that's through meditation, connecting with nature, or just even like reflecting on your values.
Yeah, and I think that's a key insight for our listener too. We often kind of, we put these different aspects of well-being in these separate boxes, but they really do all they influence each other. Imagine feeling like so aligned with your purpose that it just, positively impacts your emotional resilience, your relationships, even your physical health.
It's like leveling up in your soul. And the blog post talks about the benefits too, and I think that's really cool. They talk about like, having better relationships, having better focus, even that resilience you were just talking about against all those setbacks.
Right, and it highlights a study that found that people with higher levels of spiritual well-being, they report having less stress and greater satisfaction in their relationships, which I think is really cool.
I love when there's actual, evidence. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of evidence, let's get into this scorecard that they have for all these different wellness
Oh, yeah, the
practices.
scorecard, right.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting how they tried to put numbers on the effectiveness and ease and cost of these different practices.
I was really surprised to see mindfulness meditation
Yeah.
getting enough sleep score so highly. They both got an 8.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I think that's pretty powerful. It goes to show sometimes the most simple things are the most impactful.
For sure. For sure. Okay. And then there's CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, scored super high for effectiveness, but not so much for accessibility and cost. Is that fair?
Well, I think it brings up a really important point.
Mm.
While CBT can be like incredibly effective for a lot of people,
Mm.
it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It can be pretty expensive, and sometimes it can be really hard to find the right therapist.
Mm.
And so it's just a good reminder that your approach to mental wellness needs to be personalized.
And that's where I think things get really interesting because the blog post, it's great. It focuses mainly on those individual practices. But isn't there more to this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it talks about social well-being, but it just, skims the surface of that community aspect, which is so important for long-term mental wellness.
Yeah. It's like we're not meant to be alone, right?
Right.
And having that support system is huge for mental well-being.
Definitely. I mean, think about it. When you're going through something really difficult, having people that you can lean on, it can make such a big difference, that sense of belonging, those shared experiences, knowing that you're not alone. That's really powerful stuff.
Yeah, and it's not even just about, having someone to vent to. It's about that shared purpose, feeling like you're contributing to something bigger. And I think the blog post, it kind of touches on that in the social well-being section, but I feel like there's more to it.
Yeah, there is. It's like this, it's almost like a ripple effect, right? When individuals feel like they're supported and connected, they're more likely to be supportive to other people. And it creates this feedback loop of, well-being.
It's like, what's that saying? A rising tide lifts all boats. But how do we actually do that? Like, how do we create that sense of community, especially when, things can feel so isolating sometimes?
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, I think it really starts with just being more intentional about our connections, putting the phones down, listening to each other, and making that time for real face-to-face interaction. I mean, even those small acts of kindness, those small moments of genuine connection, they can have such a huge impact.
Yeah, and maybe it's about, rethinking how we define community. It doesn't have to be about, where you live or what you're interested in. It could be online groups or volunteering or even just, a group of friends who really have each other's backs.
Exactly. And I think this is where those challenges that the blog post mentioned, they become even more important. Like if there's so much stigma that people don't want to reach out, or if it's really hard to find help, well, then community becomes even more important.
Yeah, because then it's not just about individual, resilience. It's about taking action together, right? It's about saying, you know what, we need better systems. We need to break down those barriers so that everyone can, feel good, feel supported. Like we need to actually make mental wellness a priority for everybody.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It really is about shifting from me to we, realizing that we're all in this together and that we all have a part to play in supporting each other.
And that kind of brings me back to those two aspects of mental wellness that I was talking about earlier, occupational and spiritual. If we can tap into that, like finding work that feels meaningful and connecting to something bigger than ourselves, well that kind of, ripples outwards, right?
Right.
It helps to create a more supportive and compassionate world.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, those two things that you just mentioned, those often get overlooked.
Yeah.
We tend to
Mm.
focus on those more like immediate things, like how do I manage my stress or how do I reduce my anxiety? But really it's about cultivating purpose and connection. Like those are the things that really help us to thrive long term.
It's like you're building a house on solid ground, you know? And I think the blog post, I mean, it's got good information, but I think that's where it kind of misses something.
Right.
It tells you what you can do as an individual, but it doesn't really talk about how powerful it can be when we all work together.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. By looking at the community aspect, we're giving you, the listener, a much better understanding of how mental wellness actually works, in real life.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like we're filling in that missing piece. Okay, so I think we've talked about a lot. Let's kind of go over what we've learned in this deep dive.
Okay.
So we start with that blog post, right? Mental wellness, nurturing the mind for a healthier life. And it gave us those like the 7 key aspects, right? Emotional, psychological, social, physical, spiritual, occupational, intellectual. Kind of a lot to keep track of.
It is a lot, but I think that the good thing about it is that you don't have to do everything all at once. You
Yeah.
know, it's more about figuring out what really
Yeah.
matters to you at this moment
Mm.
and then, just finding those practices that work with your life.
Yeah, and that scorecard was pretty helpful, right? I mean, seeing those high scores for mindfulness and sleep, that's pretty basic stuff.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's what's so great about it. Sometimes the simplest things make the biggest difference. And while the scorecard is, a good place to start, it also kind of showed us that everyone's different. What works for me might not work for you. And some things like CBT, well, it's not always easy to get.
Right, and that's why I'm so glad we talked about, the whole community aspect. I think that's really where, like, the magic is.
Yeah.
It's feeling connected, supported, like you're part of something bigger. I think that's what really matters for the long run.
It is. It's that shift, right? From
Mhm.
from me to we.
Yeah.
It's realizing that we're all connected and that we can all do our part to support each other.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. If everyone around you made mental wellness a priority, just imagine how different things would be.
Yeah, it really does take a village. We need to build those villages that really make mental wellness just as important as physical health.
Yeah.
Places where people can, talk about how they're doing, where it's easy to get help, where people can take care of their mental health without feeling ashamed.
Yeah, I agree. And that all starts with each and every one of us. It's being mindful of our connections, checking in with people, challenging the stigma, and fighting for those better systems that we were talking about earlier.
Well, I think as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with this thought. You are not alone in this, all right? There are people out there who care, there's help out there, and there are communities out there waiting for you.
Totally. Mental wellness, it's not like a finish line. It's a journey. It's ongoing. So,
Mhm.
embrace it all. The ups and downs, the good and the bad. Celebrate when you make progress and remember taking care of your mental health. That's a sign of strength.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We hope you learned something and feel, a little bit more hopeful. We'll see you next time. Take care.